we're going to move on to our cinnamon wall hangings. So you want to grab your cinnamon sticks. We're going to start with one of those. I'm going to grab your long bundle of cord. So I have my thinner cord here and I have 6 long pieces of that. I'm going to untie it. And we're going to get started on the thinner of the two again and do that first. So we're going to untie our cord. Our first steps are very similar to our snowflakes if you've already finished those. So we're going to do our lark's head knots first. So that means we're going to take our cord. These are about 34 inches long, 32, somewhere between 32 and 36 probably, averaging 34. We're going to take that, fold it in half, and then we're going to lay that on top of our cinnamon stick here, and then those two ends are going to come through that loop, and we're going to pull that. So each cinnamon stick is a little different. They're totally natural, so some are very thin, some are a little thicker, some have a little ridges in them. We're just going to get these 6 strands on here first, and then we can adjust the spacing. So moving along with our lark's head knots, if you good with those, you're just going to rest this on top of your cinnamon stick and you want to pull it through. Make sure those knots are looking the same, that they all have that loop in the front instead of being open. I consider this one the back. You can decide for yourself as long as they're consistent. That's totally fine. So dividing these cords in half, and then I'm going to fill in this space here. We have 6 of these, so we're going to evenly distribute those a little bit. It should fill our cinnamon sticks pretty good. Okay. If there are ridges, you can use those and set your cord right in there. So doing 6 of these. And if at any time you need to slow down, pause video, work on these knots, you can. Everyone goes a little different pace, so feel free to keep pausing and replaying as you need. So we're going to space those out. I've got my 6 here. Again, our macrame math, so that's 6, and then breaks down into 3 groups of 4 like this. So that's going to get us started. Here's an example. I will hold up a couple other examples so that you can see that each wall hanging, there's a lot more room for customization with these versus our snowflake. So this would be our thicker cord, so it definitely does look different. Here's another one that's not quite finished, but has these really fun little fringes off to the side. So each one's going to be different. I'll show you, get you started on this pattern and show you how I did that. This really is an alternating kind of grid of square knots. So you get 1, 2, 3 square knots on that first row, and then you have 2 cords on each edge that are left open, and you have 2 square knots here on your second row. Then you go back to 3, then you have 2 cords here, you go back to 2. So I'll show you that. That's a really good starting point to get you going on your wall hanging. You can customize at any point. If you've been following along with this video and you've done your square knots and you feel comfortable, you can experiment all you would like. But just a refresher on our square knots, we're going to do our left is going to sit with like a loop here, kind of looks like a number 4. And then our right one is going to go over, and then it's going to peek through that loop. So with our wall hangings, we also have a lot more options of spacing. So that's where if I repeated this pattern and those same knots, but I adjust the spacing, it can look different. So I'm going to try that and we can compare the two just a little. So I'm going to leave about 1 inch there, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to tie that right half of my square knot. This one, the reason we do this one second after our snowflake is that we've already become a little more familiar with the knots and the cord and how everything works together. So you hopefully feel a little bit more ready to customize it yourself. You can repeat this one just as I have, but feel free to adjust if you'd like. So I'm gonna take my next group of 4 here. And before you do all of your square knots, you wanna just triple check that spacing, make sure you like where they're sitting. You can adjust as you go, but it's helpful to do that once more before we get started. And if it's helpful to also kind of put these aside, if you want to only see the 4 that you're working on, definitely do that. Make your work surface good and clean here. So then my right one is going to go over that horizontal and come up through that left side. And then you want to make sure, again, it's totally up to you. The spacing doesn't have to be the same, but I'm going to keep mine about the same just to be consistent. And I'm going to do the right side of that knot here. I'm going to untwist those in the center. I'm going to pull that down. And then those look pretty good and similar. So I'm going to do one more of those. And it's going to go back to left half, and then our right half here. Okay. And then you might notice when you go to pull that, some buckling a little bit with those 2 center cords. So that's where hold your cinnamon, pull those, and then you should see things starting to lay flat like that. So that's our first row, just at this, same as this pattern. I just left a little bit more space. If you want a longer wall hanging, leaving more space like this will get you a longer piece. If you tie your knots very close together, it's going to use up your cord a little quicker, so you'll end up with a more compact piece. Totally up to you. So that next row, we're going to go and we're going to tie just 2 square knots. So the easiest way to do that is to move those 2 outside pieces on each end of that row, move those aside. And then we're going to redistribute these into 2 groups of 4. So similar to our snowflakes, as we redistribute our groups of 4, we're going to do that here. So then we're going to take these next 4 and do our 1 square knot just the same. So our left is going to sit horizontal, and then our right, if it's again a little tricky and you need to move them all aside, you can. We're just working with now 8 cords, and we're making sure that the 2 edges are off of our work surface a little bit there. And then same thing, I'm going to adjust that spacing. Maybe make it similar spacing to this one. You can customize that if you would like. Make it smaller, larger, like this. And then pull those center cords once again, get those to sit flat. And then the last knot on this row is going to be 1 square knot, meaning 1 left and 1 right half with these 4 cords. So we're going to do our left. If it helps you to tape this down, if it's moving on you and you want to tape that cinnamon down, you certainly can. I'm trying to keep mine in the frame here so you can see everything. There we go. So we have our left half, our square knot, and then right. thinner cord is very soft, so it does have a lot of movement. And just like that, we now have our second row, so we can pull all of these back down to hang. And you can see that grid pattern starting to emerge. If you are also are having some, you can adjust the spacing so these do look pretty symmetrical. And then we can go back, and our next row will be, that's initial 3 groups of 4 to balance it back out. So we'll take this first 4 over here and do our square knot there. Here we go. Can mirror that same spacing. You can change it up if you'd like. Okay, so that's our first group of 4. Then we're going to work in the center. As the shorter my cord gets, the more I tend to work a little closer to that row before. So sometimes I'll hold all those cords in my hand and adjust them as I'm tying. Whatever feels more comfortable to you. Sometimes it helps to physically pick up those that center 2 cords so that you can get underneath it. With that, adjust those center 2. Really, those are a really good guide. There. And then we're going to do one more with this next group of 4. So we're going to do our square knot here, left, and then right. If you need a refresher on your square knot, you can always go back to the first couple minutes of our video with our snowflakes as well. But we are going to go, we did our left half of our square knot and our right half here. And then you want to make sure those are going underneath and up through that loop there. And then it probably would be helpful if you tape this down if you're struggling with this moving on you. Since it is so small and our cord is so soft, you can think about just taping this down a little. You'll be able to pull a little bit more on your cord without your whole piece moving. So maybe think about that if you have some tape handy. You want to secure that to something. So from here, you can do that same adjustment, and we can put these 2 outer cords up out of reach, and then we can redistribute this, and we can have now 2 groups of 4, and we'll do our square knot once again. So this process, alternating process, will get you very far, and you can repeat that all the way down your wall hanging, just like this. Let's do pulling those 2 in the center, just like that. And then one more square knot over here. There we go. Okay. So from there, we can pull these back down. If your cord's getting short, I still have a good bit of length, but if your cord's getting short, you can adjust which ones are on the inside and outside once again. So maybe if you redistribute these into 4, and some of these are longer than others, you want to flip them. There's a, if that overwhelms you, just look at 4 at a time, and then you can come back to something more manageable. So I flipped those to where I had, these were the 4 I was working with, and they sit flat like that, but some of them are getting a little short. So if I take this, I flip it in, and then these 2 now become my outside cords. Then I do my square knot just the same. I have 2 extra loops. So you can look at it from here down and then think of your square knot that way if those extra loops are throwing you off just a bit. And then pulling that tight. And then you want to complete that right side of your square knot again. Then it will look more similar to the others. It will have those added loops in there, but that's helpful if your lengths are a little bit unbalanced. These are actually all exactly the same. So I'm not going to flip these around, and I actually have 5 there. So I want to make sure I only have 4. They're about the same. So I'm just going to do a regular square knot. I'm not going to flip anything. You don't have to repeat what you repeat in this first, second, and third kind of column grouping of 4. It does not have to be the same all the way across. There's a lot of room for customization here. I'm just showing you one pattern. You can also see that same pattern with a little different execution, different spacing, and what that looks like. So these are, I do have this really long one, so I am going to flip these 2. So I have 4 here. I'm going to take the outside ones to the inside, and I want to take the inside ones to the outside. So you should have 2 loops here. They're a little bit off kilter. That's just because of our last row, and that's okay. You'll notice that. So then we're going to do one more square knot here. This kind of looks like an ampersand here. We have a loop here and a loop here. And our right cord's going to go over that horizontal, and it's going to go up through this loop. We want to leave these 2 intact. So again, if it helps to block off that top portion, you want to keep it that. Okay, then we're going to do our right half of that square knot. Okay. And that cord's getting on the shorter end. You'll notice, apologize if you can hear that siren here through my headphones. We are, so some of them, depending on the spacing and where your knots are exactly, your cord will end up at varying lengths at the bottom. That doesn't mean you can start with it at the exact same length, and just based on spacing and placement of your knots, the lengths will vary, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do to actually wrap this one up, because I do have some length on my outside too, it's up to you. If you want to cut this off just like that, these 3 be your last row, you can. I apologize again for the noise if you're hearing that in the background. So let's finish this one up. I'm going to take these 2 on the outside and see what happens if I actually tie a square knot around all of those. So because these 2 on the outside are longer, I'm going to see what happens there. Sometimes you just have to experiment a little and adapt to the length of cord you have as you get further down your piece. So I did my first half of my square knot there, and I'm going to do left half here. You want to make sure I did left and then right, I'm sorry. So you want to make sure you're getting all of that other 10 or so pieces there. And then I can pull that, and I actually made a little bundle square knot there. So I can adjust that spacing. I have plenty of cord length here. And then they're all about the same length. If you want to go back and cut them, you can. If you like them really have varying lengths, you can leave them. Again, the option to fray the edges just by untwisting that rope, and you untwist, you'll get 3 smaller bundles, and you can even further untwist those. Comb it out with a small comb, a small brush, or even a toothpick, or just your fingers. All work. You really don't need anything fancy. They're super soft, so you can really untwist it yourself with no tools needed. And then just cutting one at a time, just like I did right there. If I try to cut too many at once, your scissors really can't get a clean cut. So patient and cut one at a time there. So that is one option pattern for our wall hanging. You'll notice this one here is, I used the same knots. I used a lot of the same pattern, but I have a different result, a little different length, different styles. So you can use these knots that you're becoming more familiar with, adjust the placement of them a little bit if you want to, adjust the spacing. And then one last step on these, if you want to hang it on something, you could always just put this on a little hook or nail if you want to, or you have colored string that you can use to hang it. So just cut about at least a foot. You can eyeball it. The way that you would tie these would be something like this is one good way, so that it's balanced and you have something to hang up here. So leaving enough length if you want that to be longer. Cut that. You can wrap your string back up. It has a little slit at the top there so that it doesn't come unraveled. And then we're just going to tie these. There we go. I'm going to tie that, just 2 loops there to tie it good and tight. If it's too loose, if you tie it and it slips off the edge, you can also tie it in between some of these knots if you want, if that way it won't slip off. You know, that could just be a very thin little hanging if you tie it in a different spot. And you also, if you have a little tail hanging and you want to tuck that, you can flip your wall hanging over, lift up some of these lark's head knots, lift them up, and you can then hide your string by putting it behind those lark's head knots. And then once you've done that, after maybe 2 cords under 2 of those, cut it off. It's green, so I know it's really blending in there, but I tucked it underneath the back. And then if you did happen to loosen up those lark's head knots as you did that, just tighten those again, adjust that spacing. And then you can go back over here, whatever length you have left or whatever length you want, tie that second knot, and then you'll do just the same. Tie that. It helps that this cinnamon's a little bit organic in shape, so sometimes this doesn't have the inclination to slide too much, although I just slid it in there. So adjust that spacing and then maybe tuck that green. You can also do this part first if you know what color you want, you know what length you want. That way you have your string tucked under your lark's head knots before you move on, but sometimes you don't know until the end, so you can always do that second too. And there you go. Tighten everything back up, adjust your spacing so that you like it. Give this green string or whatever color string you have, give it a little tug, make sure it's secure. You don't want to cut those tails off too close to that knot you tied around your cinnamon, or when you pull it, it might slip. So that little tail tucking behind our lark's head knots is helpful because it will give us some extra length. So then you can hang that up and you're good to go. can always trim it later too if you want to hang it first before you trim it. So that's one of our wall hangings. We will hop over and we will do just a couple quick knots on our thicker string, but the process really is just the same. So at this point, if you want to pause, you want to grab your thicker but long bundle of cord. So those are about 34 inches, but we'll have a bundle of 6. So you want to, here's one that I've already got started here. So feel free to pause if you want to get your thicker cord out. You want to do your 1, 2, 3, 6 lark's head knots to get that attached. I'll untie this one so we can do it together. This one I also already attached a green string to, so I did that on the front end as opposed to the back end. Just the same, you can see it's green, so it really is tricky to see, but that string is tucked underneath those loops there, so it's good and secure. And then I have my 6 lark's head knots here. Pull these down straight. The thicker cord sometimes just requires some extra tugging, a little more forearm strength. So get those good and secure there before we get too far. And then you'll notice can be a similar pattern to our small cord. We have the same amount of 6 strings and 3 groups of 4. So to start out, we'll do the same and just get a square knot on each to get them secured. And then I'll show you a couple different patterns and adjustments you can make on these. So we'll do our square knot, our left here, and then our right. So the thicker cord definitely does, just like the snowflakes, it does go a little quicker. So if you want a longer piece with your thicker cord, you definitely want to leave some space. So you can, again, leave a couple inches there before you tie your knot even, and that can give you a little added length. You can also do that flipping of strings and which ones are your outside working cords. If you do a couple knots and you're running short on cord, you can adjust that. This one, why don't we try to adjust the placement of this square knot? So this one maybe is going to be a little bit even further down than that one. So each row does not need to be exactly the same. So I did my left side. I want to do my right side here. Then I'm going to go over to my next group of 4 and do one more square knot. And up to you. If you want to make this symmetrical and you want that first one to be shorter, you can do that. We also could make this go in a diagonal shape if you want to do that. Or if you want them all to be the same height, that's also an option. Really, I want you to feel free to be creative on these wall hangings and try things out. You can always take these knots out. So before you cut anything, when you get to the bottom, you can make adjustments, try something, see how it works, take it out, try it again, and be open to that. So now we've got our 3 square knots. My cord's starting to fray a little. The sample has been done and undone a couple times. So I'm gonna just twist that back, and I'm also just gonna embrace that one and not worry about that. I might actually invert that on my next row so that I can get a little bit more length there. But if I take my 2 outside cords and put those aside here, I can do a similar regrouping and I can tie a square knot with these. I like to do that at least some point in my wall hanging, because that, instead of having like 3 individual columns, so like if I kept going with square knots and things on these rows, on these columns, excuse me, then they're individual. But if you alternate and I toss these two up there, and then I'm grabbing 2 from each bundle, I'm then creating more of a connected pattern, and I don't have individual columns. Everything does become more secure. So I'm gonna do my square knot here. Again, I'm gonna do this just so you can see there. I'm gonna take the left one here, and I'm gonna take right through that loop. And then based on that spacing, I don't want it to sit too sideways like that. So I'm gonna tie my knot underneath this lowest one and get that. I want it to be rather parallel to my cinnamon stick for most of my knots there. So I don't want my cords to start going at an angle. So I'll tie the other half of that square knot, and there we go. So now that's all good and secure, and those are all connected. And we'll do one more square knot over here. You could at any point on your wall hangings also, if you want to incorporate that more spiral design as opposed to so many square knots, you could do just that left spiral, right spiral. And then you'll notice right now what I'm going to do is go through and pull some of these center cords, adjust that spacing just a little bit. I want to make sure things are sitting flat. Sometimes it's easy to hold it up and then take a look, see what it looks like, what gravity does to it. Hold it up, take a look. It might hang just slightly different than when it's resting flat on your tabletop. So I have a couple shorter cords here at the edges. So I'm going to do that same technique, and I'm going to flip these once more so that I have longer cord. So here I'm going to again have that kind of ampersand shape. I have a loop here, one here, and then that's going to get me pretty close to the bottom of my cord, but yours might be slightly different length, and it might not be unraveling quite as much. So even if it's unraveling, I can still tie this square knot, just holding on to which 3 go together. And doing that again. If yours starts to unravel too much on you as you're tying your knots, just a little piece of tape there can help. Mine has been tied and untied, so yours should be really in good shape. There's a little bit extra length because it does tend to unravel. There we go. So I'm getting to the end. Those are getting fairly short. So I'm gonna do the same thing on my right side here. And I'm gonna take the inner 2 and push them to the outside, and we'll center this one that's towards the center of my piece and this one on the very outside. Those are gonna come to the center now. So I've created 2 loops here, and I'm ready to tie my square knot this way. So again, getting kind of horizontal so that my cinnamon and my square knots are parallel to each other. This one here. Adjusting the center strings to make sure there we go. And then this is going to be just at the very tail end of length that I have. So 2, and even like that. I'm still able to tie that Just have to be a little careful. But again, mine is unraveling much more than yours. So there we go. We have our square knot there. I do have more space in the center. So I can tie one more square knot here. And left side first. And then the last thing we'll do is, as you're getting to the edge of your cord, again, if yours is a little longer, you can do another row of knots. You can adjust that spacing if you want. But if you're getting to fairly short pieces here like I am, the next step is going to be to unravel those edges again. So that's where, if you have any pieces like this that are kind of sticking up, when we unravel that, this cord is great because it unravels really nicely, and then they tend to sit flat. They have a little bit of curled texture to them, but you can also unravel that once more if you want a very soft texture. So these still have a little curl to them. Go back even more and unravel each third of your rope there. You can do that. And I'll unravel them all the way up to my last knot so that the bottom is good and soft. But it's up to you as to how you want to finish yours off. Something like that. You can also go back and tie, if you have some extra length, you want to add a different texture. You can unravel them and then you can also tie them into little knots. You could add beads at the bottom if you wanted to. But I think ours are fairly simple. Little mini creations here. So something like that. Those knots also help to kind of weight any pieces down. And then you can finally go at the very end and cut your piece. One tip that I do use for some of my other projects when cutting edges like this, if you want it to be very blunt and straight across, you can use a piece of tape, just masking tape, washi tape, scotch tape, any tape. Tape that, and then what you want to do is cut just above the tape. So what that will do is that you will not have all of these loose edges and tiny pieces of string, but you might have a few, but most of your edges will be attached to that tape. So you put your tape, say here at the bottom, I apologize, I don't have any right in arm's reach here, but you put your tape, and then as long as you cut above the tape so that it's all attached, then you will end up with just a row of tape and some string attached to it and less little fuzzies. But if you like a more organic shape, you don't need to tape it. You don't need to get a very straight line. So you can go through and just trim it by hand. It also helps sometimes to trim it once it's hanging up, because then you let gravity pull it just a little bit. Excuse me. There we go. Grabbed our camera there. So that is the end of our wall hanging. Again, many options for customization. Here's another one with just different spacing. So we have our square knots that are alternating, and really just depending on the exact placement, each one ends up a little bit different. If you're curious about a specific one and you have any questions at all, you're like, I tried this, mine doesn't look like this one, I don't like this one. I'm sure it's very beautiful. You can always untie it. You can go back, you can adjust a row. You'll be surprised as to how just changing up one or two knots can change the entire piece. So you can make some adjustments. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help you live or answer some questions. If you need some more materials, or you would like another set of snowflakes or something like that, you can also reach out. I'm happy to help with materials or links to materials and share that way. So I'll grab my snowflakes again. We have our thicker snowflake here. We had our thinner snowflake. And we have our two wall hangings. So hopefully you have made it through the whole video. You probably paused a couple times. Hopefully maybe you took some breaks, but hopefully you've made it through and made your 4 different pieces. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My info will be on the handouts that you have, which I know are very, very simple. So if you are overwhelmed by the handouts, hopefully the video did clear up a good bit of those actual steps and what those square knots look like and what the placement of those can look like. But also reach out. You've got my email and contact info on those sheets if you have some more specific questions. Happy to help. Hopefully you enjoyed making these. You can keep them, you can gift them. Whatever you do, hopefully you had fun making them. And I thank you so much for sticking around, and we will see you virtually one day soon.